This season, Daniela speaks to endometriosis and chronic illness patients, those who are going through or have gone through the pain and the diagnosis of endometriosis and are navigating this extremely common but poorly understood condition. Over the last few years, an army of patients have arisen. They are speaking out, fighting back, doing their own research and raising awareness of endometriosis. Let's listen to these brave warriors who have decided that enough is enough and who will stop at nothing to reclaim their health.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Not Defined by Endo Podcast. Today's conversation is with Tihesia Bennett. Tihesia is a 24-year-old incoming junior doctor. She was inspired to create her sexual and reproductive health awareness page, She Talks, on Instagram after she was diagnosed with superficial endometriosis in 2020. Join me today as we listen to Tihesia's story. Hi, Isha. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show with me today. It's nice speaking to lovely ladies like you who have been through a lot and who are empowering themselves and empowering other people as they navigate this health journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So I know we've been talking pre-recording and, I was trying not to ask any juicy questions so that everyone can hear and get to know you. So tell me a bit about who you are, where you're from, what you do. And I know you do something on Instagram. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so my name's Tihesia. A lot of people just call me Isha. I'm actually a final year medical student. I just passed my finals, so I'll be starting as a doctor in August.
Congrats.
Thank you very much. But yeah, that's a bit about what I do. I do have a big interest in sexual and reproductive health. And in terms of the reproductive side, I myself was diagnosed with endometriosis. I think that's something that triggered me to start my page, which is called She Talks. So that's another thing that I do just sort of on the side. It's a bit of a sexual and reproductive health awareness page on Instagram. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay. So tell me a bit about your journey from your symptoms to diagnosis. How did these symptoms begin, and how did you know that something was wrong, and how long did it take for you to get seen and diagnosed?
Okay, so for me, it all started, I think this would have been about 2017. I'd been on the pill for such a long time, the progesterone-only pill, for years and years and years. And I thought, you know what, I've been on it for a while, let me come off. I wanted to have a cycle and see, I don't know, I feel like I'm quite in touch with my body and
okay.
I don't really like to be on medications too much and that sort of thing. So I was like, okay, let me try and come off the pill. And I had the most horrific period that I'd ever had in my life, the worst period ever, really, really painful, really heavy. I remember, so this is when I was in my second year of uni, and I remember being held up on the lecture hall benches, in excruciating pain. Wow. And at that point, I was like, no, I can't do it. I need to go back on the pill. I can't be doing these periods if this is what it's like. I didn't even realize at the time that there were no alarm bells, there were no sort of red flags at that point. So then I went back on the pill and sort of expected the period to stop, but it didn't. I was sort of still bleeding for a good 8 weeks. And that was sort of the time that I was first interacting with healthcare. So I went to the doctors, had an appointment with a nurse, and they said, it's just breakthrough bleeding. No, it'll go, it's fine. And I was like, I think this was
later.
Yeah. I think this was the 4-week point, and I was like, bleeding for 4 weeks doesn't sound like nothing. But I went with it. I was still taking my pill. And then, so this is when I was back in Peterborough, which is my hometown, for the summer. And I came back to uni and I went to see a doctor again because it was just too much to deal with. And then they gave me a medication called tranexamic acid, which literally just clots the blood, stops the bleeding, which it did. But I realised that I was still having chronic pelvic pain that was just not going away. So this continued for a while. I put up with it for a good 6 months to a year at that point. And it was sort of just all the time. And this is when I started my clinical placements as well. It was a third year. So it's quite long hours standing up on the wards. I remember sort of shuffling from leg to leg, like in just chronic pain. And then coming home and having work to do and just wanting to curl up in bed, and then no painkillers working. And then sort of trying like cocodamol and something a bit stronger, and it just making me feel really drowsy. And it was like lose, like I'm not getting any work done, I'm still in pain, like now I'm drowsy and I feel nauseous, like just nothing was helping at all. So then I went to the doctors a couple of times, and it was being sort of thrown between places. So they were saying, make sure that you've had all of your STI checks and make sure someone's had a look at your cervix. So I had to then go to the sexual health clinic, and we all know what it's like getting an appointment at a sexual health clinic, especially having sort of like a 9 to 5. You're working in the hours when you're supposed to make an appointment, which I think is something that people don't really consider as well. So yeah, it was a bit of back and forth for a while, and then finally had an appointment with a doctor who was lovely and was like, no, like I know that you're in a lot of pain, and I'm going to get you an appointment with a specialist as soon as I can. So that felt like my first breakthrough. And then I got a letter about an appointment, but then they rejected the referral.
Really?
The first hospital that I got sent to rejected the referral.
Did they give a reason?
I don't think they did to me. Maybe the GP would have seen what the reason was, but she tried to refer me on a service that would get me seen quickly, and they said, nope, not today. So then I got re-referred, and then it was about a 6-month wait period for the appointment that I'd been referred for. Turn up to the appointment, and they were like, oh, did you not get the letter that says that it's been cancelled and rescheduled to next month?
No way.
Yeah, so that's 7 months now. They'd sent the letter to my home address, even though I changed. So there's all of these logistics as well that people, don't realize in the process. It's not just, I think people hear like waiting time and they think, oh, like it's just sitting waiting, but it's not. It's making these little steps and then having to take about 10 steps backwards in the process because of all of the systems in healthcare. And then I finally got seen by a specialist, and they did offer me operation straight away, like to investigate, but I was quite nervous about having an op. So I opted to try the contraceptive injections.
Okay.
And they didn't work, and then I finally had my operation. So
wow. Okay. So
that's the story. I feel like I was talking for ages.
So no, it's fine. The first question is always kind of a long one, like, well, you're telling me how the journey has been. I know it took a while, but I would say that you're one of the lucky ones, if that makes sense, just because a lot of people experience these pains for 7 to 10. I think mine was about 15 years before I finally, I would say when it started, like mine wasn't one of those first day of my period, it was just excruciating. Mine grew over time. And by the time I was in uni, I was the person that was known for bad periods, so, when amongst your friends groups, you're the one who has lectures and go home and, and all of that. So, and then it got really extremely bad when I came to this country, and that one for maybe 2-3 days, like initially it was like one day of the month, day one, and later it was like day 2 to 4, then later it was just like the entire period. Yes. So I'm really excited for you that I know for you also it must have been very painful and difficult, but I'm very happy that you've been able to get some investigations done and the surgery done. So when they did the surgery, what did they find?
So I had my surgery done and they found superficial endometriosis.
Okay.
But there's obviously a lot of like things in both like research papers and in, I guess, the endo community about superficial endometriosis and how the amount of endo that you have doesn't correlate to the pain that you have.
Yeah.
And my surgeon tried to say to me that, oh, you don't have endo, that can't be what's causing your symptoms. It was only the small spots of endometriosis. And like, this was literally as I was sort of coming round from the anesthetic that he was like, yeah, no, it's not endo. Maybe IBS, he said. It could be
So
IBS.
just because he saw not a lot, he was already saying that it couldn't be endo that was causing so much pain for you.
Yeah.
Shame.
Yeah. And I feel like it's only recently and from the online community and the Instagram endo community that's really helped me be like, no, like I do. Because before it was like, oh, like I had an operation and they removed some endometriosis, but I'm not sure if I have it because the surgeon said that I don't. But like I did, like on my report it says I did have it, and my symptoms went as well after the surgery.
Really? Oh, that's great.
For a while. Yeah, like the surgery did help definitely with my periods and the other symptoms that I was having. I feel like things are starting to recur a bit more now because it has been pushing 2 years since my op, and I feel like because it was just there's a difference in the types of surgeries and what's better for recurrence, isn't it? And I think I just had like the ablation.
I feel like that's really sad because everyone says we know that surgery is literally the gold standard of treatment. But it's not just any surgery. It kind of has to be excision. Just because excision pulls the cells from the roots as much as possible. It's more thorough than ablation, which is just them like burning it off the surface. Yeah. So, it's kind of annoying that the doctor, I mean, if you had superficial and he thought it wasn't a lot, I don't know what determines if they would do ablation or not, but I feel like, isn't it better to just do excision so that recurrence rates are lower? People are not left in pain for so long, but it's just a whole behemoth of a system that you don't even know where to start from. And I think what's also sad is, doing surgery and 2 years later, you feel like you're back in the same spot. So it feels like, what's the point? And I know a lot of people say excision is gold standard, which is true. But also in this community, what people have to realize is that it's very rare for someone to say, I had one surgery and that was it forever. Like most people are like, okay, I had surgery 2-3 years later, I started feeling symptoms again. It's coming back. And it's just a really cruel disease, if I must say.
Exactly. This is very true. I think there's so many barriers at all parts of the journey, isn't there? From accessing healthcare to actually being in the healthcare and having your voice heard to actually getting the treatment. And then even once you've had the treatment, the journey isn't over.
I know.
Unfortunately. But this is why it's so important that there's more funding into research for endo. I think a lot of issues that primarily affect people who are born female do tend to not get as much funding, and people are just not seen as, I guess, as important historically in healthcare and healthcare research.
Very true. Very true. So I know that we talked about barriers, and I know that you said you do research, and I wanted to talk a bit more about that. Tell me about the research you're working on. So is this outside of medical school? Is it in medical school? And
sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and what's it about, and what do you think will it impact females?
I did, so I'm a medical student, but a lot of medical students will take a year out of study to do something called intercalation. So that's where you have the opportunity to do a different degree. Some people pick something completely different. I've had friends that have gone and done business or music for a year. But you can also do another sort of healthcare course. So I decided to do a research master's in reproduction and pregnancy at the University of Manchester. So that's what I spent, I think it was 2021 doing. And my project was looking at a pregnancy complication, actually, so not endo related, but interesting nonetheless. but it was about a pregnancy complication called chronic histiocytic enterocolitis.
Wow. What does that mean?
That was me when I first started the project. That's me now, to be honest. It's a pregnancy complication where there's not that much known about it, to be honest. But we think that it's where the mum's immune system attacks the placenta. And then this can cause like a buildup of immune cells and deposits of like clots in the placenta. And then that means that it can affect baby's growth. And unfortunately, in some cases, it can affect sort of baby's life. So a lot of the pregnancies do end up in loss, unfortunately. So it's a really important area that needs a lot more research, but it is a really, really rare complication. So it's hard to sort of get enough samples to do research on, and there's not many papers out there and stuff like that. But it was a really interesting year. Like, it was very different to what I'd been doing as a medical student. Like, I'd never ever stepped foot in a lab, and I actually like was dealing with placentas and collecting them and doing studies on them, which was just completely different to what I was used to.
Wow, that's so mind-blowing though, and a bit sad. How did you go doing the research? Must have been a bit emotional or tough. How did
I think I think when I was reading about the papers and seeing the statistics about, in a way it is quite similar to endo, I guess, because there's not much known about it, and even when it's treated, the treatments that they use don't really help the outcomes. In some studies, it's shown that the women who were taking the treatment actually ended up with worse outcomes.
Oh my!
So it's similar in that sense. And reading the papers was quite emotional, thinking about the women that actually experienced that. But I think doing the actual research, you're quite distanced from the patients. So obviously, as a medical student and as a doctor, I'll be a lot more, patient focused and like facing patients, I guess. But lab research is quite removed from that.
So what was your conclusion from the research?
So my study in particular was looking at particular immune cells in the placentas. So I was sort of confirming things that were already found in papers about the types of immune cells that were there, and also looking at the presence of iron in placentas, which is something that hadn't been looked at. And there's a relationship between iron and different immune cells, and whether the immune cells are trying to attack or whether they're trying to protect. So it was sort of foundation work that will be built on by other researchers in the centre. Obviously, I'm just a 1 year part of a big puzzle. But it was interesting nonetheless, and I hope that my work will help to build at least the foundations of much greater findings in that field.
Wow, well done, and thank you for that. I feel like many of us, especially women, need to get more into research, into understanding female gynecological or other health conditions, just because there's something I posted a while ago, maybe a couple of years ago on Instagram, and it was like, it just occurred to me that the importance of diagnosing diseases like endometriosis pretty early, instead of waiting 7 to 10 years or whatever, is that it would actually inspire a lot of people. Imagine a, 14, 15, 16-year-old girl finding out that she's got endometriosis and deciding that, I'm going to actually study this, in uni or whatever. Like, many of us find out when we've finished uni or done, we had other things, and this could actually pivot some people and say, actually, I want to know more. Why isn't there more known about this condition? Like, instead of spending my life doing something else, this is actually something I want to find out and use my life to do to help other women. And I think it's really important. So it's really commendable that you went into that and tried to do that research and came out with some conclusions. I hope that, like you said, it's a foundation for other researchers to do more and maybe find out, why that condition happens to pregnant women. So well
done. Thank you. I think one thing I learned was how long research takes, and like all of the behind the scenes things that go on with, getting funding and getting enough people for studies and things like that. Like there is a lot, I think, behind the scenes that we as patients don't really see. So it was definitely interesting. Thank you.
Oh, well done. So let's talk about She Talks. I know that you are on Instagram and spreading and raising awareness about lots of different things. Can you tell me a bit more about what your aim is? What's your goal for She Talks, and do you have any future plans and anything you want to share?
So She Talks is like my little baby. I think it started as I was quite hesitant, I remember at first to put it out to the world, I guess, and I felt like it was something that I had to have perfected. But it was a year for learning for me, and sort of realised it's not, you don't have to have things perfect to make a start, especially when it comes to sort of raising awareness and things like that. You learn on the job sort of vibe. Exactly. So my aims with She Talks is to just raise awareness about sexual and reproductive health in general, because I feel like it's an area that we don't learn much about, especially in the education system. I think people reach a big age and are not in touch with their sexual health or their reproductive health, and people always sort of feel like it's a bit too late. So that was sort of my first aim. But then as I looked a bit closer into it, I realized that there's actually a lot of health inequalities in sexual and reproductive health. So on my page, I've spoken about how I think it's with cervical cancer screening, Black women are less likely to attend. In America, there's already a lot of sort of deaths from things like ovarian cancer, because it's picked up so late, but there's a much greater incidence of death in Black women with ovarian cancer. And with sexual health, there's a study that shows that 15 to 18-year-olds who are Black and Asian are less likely to have a good education about their sexual health and sort of know where to get testing and that sort of thing. So I think those sorts of studies and reading about that sort of thing really fueled my passion in that area and wanting to raise awareness about those issues.
Oh, that's really good. And I think it's very important what you're doing. A few years ago, again, I had a conversation on the podcast with a lady called Amy. She's the host of another podcast, Endo Podcast, called In 16 Years of Endo. And we talked about the bias in healthcare. And it was, while doing the research for that episode, it was just so disheartening to see how worse it is for people that are, in minority groups, Black and Asians. And there's so much work to do. Like, it made me realize that sometimes you actually want to dress more appropriately or more formally to go for your appointment with the doctor, just so that you look like you know what you're talking about. I don't know if anyone listening has experienced this, but initially I would just go to the doctors, however I'm feeling, especially because sometimes I'm feeling like horrible.
Yeah.
So I realized that sometimes you actually had to go with your head held high and, show that, like, I would have my notes, because otherwise I would forget or I would be panicky. And I don't know how it is for, white people, but this is what we experience. And it's pretty important to be able to educate people that look like us and be able to let them know that they, like, on their own end, they have to go armed with their doctors, but then it's also important to educate the doctors as well, and for them to be aware of maybe their implicit bias, because sometimes they might not know that they have it, or they might not be aware, they might not have that awareness. So there's so much work to be done, and I think that I'm hoping She Talks does some of that work, because it's really
hopefully. Hopefully. I feel like at the minute I've reached a bit of a crossroads with She Talks, and I'm trying to figure out the path that I want to take with it, especially as I sort of move into like actually being a doctor, how I can use my position best on the page. And also I think so part of my job that I'm taking on in July will be I'm on a sort of specialized foundation pathway, so I have the opportunity to spend, I think it's half a day every week or every 2 weeks on leadership.
Okay, that's
so
really
I do want to, I want to use that time to integrate similar aims, I guess, as I've got with She Talks into my clinical practice and see how I can sort of bring the both together, because I feel like they've sort of run alongside each other for a while, but I feel like this might be a nice point where they can cross and I can take some of those thoughts and passions across.
That's really good. I'm kind of excited that you're a doctor about to be
almost.
And also have this vision or this mission, just because I feel like many of us are, like we said, I think on this podcast and on loads of podcasts, about how some of us feel really disappointed with the doctors. Even you have experienced your doctor saying, well, you don't have endometriosis, but it's written in the notes that you have superficial endometriosis, and just brushing things off. So I think we're getting to a point as more and more people are like you know, actually in the industry, in the medical world. And also remember to be empathetic towards the patients, because maybe you're on both sides or you understand both sides. So it's really exciting to see, you know, what's going to happen as years go by. But I'm hoping that there's you and many others bring change.
I hope so too. I've had a couple of consultations in my final placement. Actually, I was in a GP practice, and a few patients with either sort of the beginnings of endo or recurrence of endo, and it's such a bittersweet moment, because I just want to be like, I feel you, like I've been there, I know. And in a way I am like that, but in a more professional way. But it feels nice to be the person that I needed. And in my first consultation to be like, no, like I understand how you're feeling and it's okay, I'm going to refer you, that sort of thing. Like, I think it feels like a nice circle to be like, okay, I'm now that person that can recognize that for people.
That's really good. You know, I have this, I don't know, this dream, an impossible one, by the way, because I know that I can go back to medical school. But sometimes I'm like, isn't there a way to just like fast track and say, I just want to focus on endometriosis? Do I have to do how many years of medical school before I decide I'm going to specialize?
Make yourself a job as like an endometriosis advocate or something. You can just be like posted up in the GP practices, like get people on the door, like, what's your consultation about?
I know. I wish I could. Maybe I will.
Look into it. Listen, jobs aren't made until we make them.
I know,
make yourself a position.
Exactly. Oh, but it's been really, really lovely talking to you, Isha. Do you have anything to say to people who whatever state they are at the moment regarding their health, their sexual or reproductive health? It doesn't have to be chronic issues like endometriosis, but whatever they're going through. Do you have any advice to say to them as they navigate their journey as well?
I would say an important thing to keep in mind always is that you are your biggest advocate. It's not easy all the time, but we do have to stand up for ourselves as patients. So I think just keeping in mind that you have a right to access healthcare, you have a right to a good standard of healthcare, and you have a right to be treated and for your concerns and your problems to be heard. I think it's easy to, even when I went as someone with a medical background, I still felt nervous and I still felt like I'd forget things. And that's me with, knowledge of how consultations work and knowing what they need to hear. And I still felt nervous. So I feel like I'm speaking from a place of privilege almost. I can't imagine what it's like to sort of not have that background and seek help with sort of sexual and reproductive and gynecological issues. But I think it's important just to keep that in mind, and keep in mind that you have a right to be seen and to be heard.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's lovely
advice.
Lovely
speaking to you.
Yes, same. And I wish you all the best with the end of medical school, and I hope we someday catch up again.
Yeah, definitely.
You're a doctor, and you're working really hard on She Talks, and
I can do it the other way around. I'll interview you.
Yes, that'll be good. That'll be really good. And I know you'll make a big difference. So thank you so much for all you're doing, and take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. Don't forget to share, rate, and subscribe. If you'd like to share your story, please reach out on Instagram or Facebook, or send an email to info@notdefinedbyendo.com. Till next time, remember, you are not defined by endo.